Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1790, and the verdant rolling hills of the Hudson Valley, particularly the secluded glen known as Sleepy Hollow in colonial New York, whispered with tales far older and darker than the burgeoning American Republic. Here, Dutch settlers had carved out a life from the rugged land. Their sturdy stone farmhouses and quiet churches nestled amongst ancient, gnarled trees that seemed to predate time itself. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, often carried a peculiar stillness, an almost unnatural hush that settled over the valley, deepening as dusk descended. It was a place steeped in folklore, where phantom riders and spectral figures were as much a part of the local narrative as the changing seasons. Yet beneath these well-worn tales, a deeper, more insidious horror festered, an unseen, intangible presence that had watched, waited, and preyed upon the inhabitants of Sleepy Hollow for centuries. It was not the famed Headless Horseman, though. His legend often served as a convenient, albeit terrifying, distraction. This was something else, something far more primordial, more subtle, and utterly inescapable, the Shadowman of Sleepy Hollow, an unseen watcher that permeated the very fabric of the valley and whose victims never truly left its grasp. This is the harrowing documented account of a centuries-old entity that still haunts the collective unconscious of the Hudson Valley. The earliest documented accounts of an unusual presence in Sleepy Hollow date back to the late 17th century, long before the American Revolution. Dutch settlers, renowned for their pragmatic stoicism, began to record unsettling occurrences in their family Bibles and personal journals. Old Dirk van Broek, in a faded journal entry from 1698, described a persistent coldness in his bedchamber, even by a roaring fire, and the distinct sensation of being observed by unseen eyes, a silent shadow that lengthened in his periphery, though no one stood there. He attributed it to malicious spirits of the wilderness, a common belief among the early European colonists grappling with an unfamiliar and often terrifying landscape. However, the incidents grew more specific. Children, often the most sensitive, to such ethereal influences, would awaken screaming, claiming to see a tall, dark figure standing over their beds, silent, just watching. Adults dismissed these as nightmares, but the consistency of the descriptions was unsettling. By the mid-18th century, as the population of Sleepy Hollow grew, so too did the tales, though often spoken in hushed tones. The Watcher, as some began to call it, was known to appear in the darkest corners of rooms, in the deep shadows beneath ancient oaks, or as an elongated, distorted silhouette on moonlit nights. It never spoke, never touched, but its presence alone instilled a profound, paralyzing dread. Farmer Garrett Van Tassel, in a sworn affidavit to the local magistrate in 1753, now preserved in the New York State Archives, reported the inexplicable disappearance of his prize stallion, found a league away, trembling and covered in a cold sweat, as if pursued by an invisible terror, yet no tracks were present save its own. Van Tassel claimed to have seen a formless darkness move across the fields that night. These incidents, initially dismissed as superstition, began to accumulate, forming a disturbing pattern. The American Revolution, with its chaos and bloodshed, briefly overshadowed the local legends, but the Shadowman merely adapted. Soldiers encamped in the valley, both patriot and loyalist, reported unsettling experiences. A Hessian mercenary's diary, discovered in a battlefield burial site near Tarrytown, contained frantic scribblings from 1777. The forest breathes, shadows move without light. I see them when I close my eyes, not ghosts of the dead, but something older, something waiting. The mercenary Johann Schmidt was later found hanged from a tree, his face contorted in a silent scream, his pockets empty, save for a single, withered black feather. The official report cited suicide. It was in the post-Revolutionary War period that the Shadowman's presence began to subtly, insidiously intensify. The increased population and the expansion of settlements seemed to provide more conduits, or hosts, for its influence. Dr. Elias Thorne, a physician who moved to Sleepy Hollow in 1785, initially dismissed the local folklore as rustic superstition. However, his personal journal, discovered among his effects after his own disappearance in 1799, details a horrifying descent into belief. Thorne initially documented what he termed widespread melancholia and somnambulism among the villagers, especially during the long, dark winter months. Patients reported chronic sleeplessness, vivid nightmares of being watched, and an inexplicable compulsion to walk alone into the darkest parts of the valley at night, often returning disoriented and terrified, with no memory of their nocturnal wanderings. Thorne, a man of science, sought a rational explanation, perhaps a localized malarial fever or a shared psychological trauma from the recent war. He administered tonics, sedatives, and advised fresh air. Yet the symptoms persisted, even worsened. In a journal entry from January 1790, Thorne describes his first personal encounter. "Last night I was roused from sleep by a profound coldness in my chamber. The fire, though roaring when I retired, was naught but embers. A shadow, not cast by any object, stretched from the far corner, reaching towards my bed. It had no form, no discernible features, yet I felt its presence, a palpable malevolence. It simply watched. A cold dread, unlike any I have ever known, gripped me. I could not move, could not cry out. It remained for what felt like an eternity before slowly, impossibly, receding back into the shadows of the wall." Thorne's scientific skepticism began to crumble, replaced by a growing, terrifying conviction. He noted that the melancholia among villagers often preceded unexplained disappearances. Farm animals would vanish without a trace, only to be found days later disoriented and starving, their eyes wide with unshakable terror, their bodies often marked by strange, cold burn-like patterns. Then the humans began to disappear. Young. Ichabod Crane, the ambitious but superstitious schoolmaster, became the valley's most famous missing person in 1799, his horse found without its rider, a shattered pumpkin nearby. While Washington Irving would later immortalize the Headless Horseman as the culprit, Thorne's journal offered a chilling alternative. Thorne suspected that the horseman was merely a manifestation, a physical face adopted by the Shadowman to further its agenda. Thorne's journal documents a chilling escalation. The Shadowman began to speak, not with a voice, but with thoughts implanted directly into the mind, cold and clear as mountain ice. These thoughts were not random. They contained specific, intimate knowledge about the individual, their hidden fears, their secret desires. "It knows everything," Thorne scribbled frantically in his last legible entry, dated March 1799. "It has no form, but it has a mind, and it is growing, it is feeding on our fear, on our secrets. It wants more than just observation now. It wants connection." Thorne believed the Shadowman was seeking to establish a more permanent conduit, or vessel, and that the disappearances were either a means to that end or the unfortunate outcome of failed attempts. He theorized that the entity was attempting to wear human minds to gain a physical presence in the world. Thorne disappeared shortly after that final entry. His house was found locked from the inside, his papers scattered, and a profound, inexplicable coldness pervading his study. The only trace, a single, withered black feather on his desk, identical to the one found near the Hessian mercenary decades earlier. The official report cited his disappearance as unknown circumstances, attributing his journal's contents to delusions brought on by isolation and overwork. But the villagers whispered otherwise. They knew. Over the 19th century, Sleepy Hollow became synonymous with tales of the supernatural, largely due to Irving's romanticized version of the Headless Horseman. However, local historians and folklorists continued to collect more unsettling accounts that went beyond headless specters. The Shadowman, or the Watcher in the Walls, as it was sometimes called, continued its subtle reign of terror. Families reported heirlooms disappearing and reappearing in strange places, mirrors reflecting distorted images, and the distinct scent of ozone and cold earth permeating their homes on quiet nights. Children still reported the tall, dark figure in their rooms and the inexplicable impulse to wander into the dark woods. These were not mere ghost stories. They were consistent, terrifying experiences that transcended generations. A particularly disturbing series of events occurred in the 1850s, documented in the meticulously kept ledger of the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery caretaker, Bartholomew Bart Croft. Croft, a stoic and cynical man, initially scoffed at the tales. However, his ledger, rediscovered in 1968, began to record an increasing number of unclaimed bodies found in the valley. Individuals who were seemingly strangers, often found disoriented and catatonic, their eyes wide and blank, muttering about whispers in the dark and faces made of shadow. These individuals, when they could speak, often claimed to have been called to Sleepy Hollow, drawn by an irresistible force. Croft also noted an unusual phenomenon: the grass and foliage around certain older graves, particularly those of the earliest Dutch settlers, withered and died, even in the height of summer, leaving barren circular patches. He theorized a mineral, leaching, but his private notes expressed profound unease. "The ground here is hungry," he wrote in 1858, "and it is not for the dead it hungers." Croft himself disappeared in 1860, his ledger left open on his desk, the last entry reading simply, "It knows my name now, and it wants to show me its true face." The early 20th century saw Sleepy Hollow evolve, but the Shadowman's influence persisted, adapting to modernity. With the advent of electricity, reports shifted from lantern-lit shadows to unexplained power outages, flickering lights, and distorted images on early television sets. The unseen watcher became the static on the screen. Dr. Alistair Finch, a parapsychologist from Columbia University, became obsessed with Sleepy Hollow in the 1950s, drawn by the sheer volume of paranormal reports. His unpublished research papers, later acquired by a private collector, meticulously documented cases of shadow people sightings, poltergeist-like activity, and what he termed telepathic intrusions, thoughts and memories that were not one's own forced into the mind. Finch theorized that Sleepy Hollow sat atop a unique geological energy conduit that amplified psychic phenomena, or perhaps a thin place, where the veil between dimensions was weakened. However, his later research took a darker turn. He began to suspect that the phenomena were not random but directed. He focused on the patterns, the specific type of psychological distress, the recurring visual of the tall, dark figure, and the knowing whispers that imparted intimate personal knowledge. Finch began to believe that the entity was actively seeking to understand human consciousness, to mimic it, and perhaps to inhabit it. He disappeared in 1962, leaving behind a chilling final audio recording, "It's learning. It showed me faces, my own face, but distorted. It wants in. It knows my name." The recording ends with a sudden guttural scream followed by absolute silence. The U.S. government, particularly during the Cold War era's burgeoning interest in psychic warfare and remote viewing, became subtly aware of the anomalous zone that was Sleepy Hollow. Classified documents from Project Blue Book, the Air Force's UFO investigation, later declassified in fragments, contain references to unexplained atmospheric disturbances, and unidentified aerial phenomena reported over the Hudson Valley, often correlating with peaks in local paranormal activity. While officially dismissed as misidentification, internal memos hint at a deeper concern regarding a localized energy signature and unusual cognitive effects experienced by field agents. These were not alien spacecraft, but something indigenous to the area, something profoundly unsettling. The cases were often linked to individuals experiencing extreme paranoia, dissociative episodes, and a disturbing tendency to speak in a fragmented, non-human syntax. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a government psychologist tasked with reviewing these Hudson Valley anomalies in the 1970s, found herself drawn into the abyss. Her secret reports leaked years later detail a growing conviction that the phenomena were not discrete events, but manifestations of a single, ancient entity. She noted how the entity seemed to feed on human fear, despair, and secrets growing stronger with each passing generation. Vance theorized that the Shadowman was an elemental force, a consciousness born of the land itself, an ancient entity whose understanding of life and form was utterly alien to humanity. She also observed a disturbing pattern. Individuals who delved too deeply into the Sleepy Hollow mystery often began to exhibit symptoms similar to its victims: sleeplessness, paranoia, and the feeling of being watched. Vance herself began to experience auditory hallucinations, hearing whispers that formed coherent sentences, offering forbidden knowledge during her research. Her final unfiled report from 1979 warned, "It is not a ghost. It is a predator of the mind, and it is growing aware of its own nature. It has been dormant, but now it is awakening, and it yearns for a true form, our form." Vance resigned from her position abruptly, citing burnout. But her colleagues noted a haunted look in her eyes and a new, unsettling stillness in her demeanor. She moved to a remote cabin in upstate New York, far from any established settlement, and was found, dead a year later, seemingly from natural causes. However, her personal journals, recovered from the cabin, were filled with intricate geometric drawings that eerily resembled the patterns in Clara Caldwell's notebooks, and repeated phrases: "It's finding me. It remembers the shape of thought. It wants to cross over." The Sleepy Hollow legend, continually refreshed by new accounts and local whispers, continued its insidious evolution. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, with the rise of digital technology, the Shadowman found new avenues of manifestation. Residents reported flickering lights, malfunctioning electronics, and distorted images appearing on security cameras. More disturbingly, some claimed to receive text messages or emails from unknown senders containing deeply personal, secret information, often followed by the chilling phrase, "I see you." These digital intrusions were often accompanied by the pervasive sense of a dark figure in their peripheral vision, or the feeling of cold, unseen hands brushing their skin. A particularly terrifying incident occurred in 2005, documented by the Sleepy Hollow Police Department, though later sealed. A family, the Millers, reported a series of escalating paranormal events in their historic farmhouse. It began with flickering lights and disembodied whispers, then progressed to objects moving on their own. The mother, Sarah Miller, reported seeing a tall, dark figure in her children's room, just watching them sleep. Her husband, David, a skeptic, initially dismissed it until he started receiving anonymous text messages detailing private conversations he'd had with his wife, conversations that had occurred only minutes before. The final horrifying event came when their youngest child, 5-year-old Emily, was found standing in the middle of their living room at 3 a.m., staring blankly at the wall, her eyes wide and dark, whispering in a voice that was not her own. "It wants to wear her. It wants to learn to walk again." The Millers fled the house that night, never to return. The house remains abandoned, a local haunted site. Dr. Mark Jensen, a cultural anthropologist from New York University, who has studied the Sleepy Hollow. Folklore for decades offers a disturbing hypothesis. He believes the Shadowman is not a traditional ghost, but a form of terrestrial consciousness, an entity intrinsically linked to the land itself, awakened and perhaps even shaped by the owl. Generations of human consciousness, fear, and belief poured into the valley. It's an entity that has been listening for centuries, Jensen posits in a rare archived interview from 2010. It has absorbed our thoughts, our fears, our desires. It knows us intimately, and what it's trying to do now is to manifest, to find a permanent foothold in our reality. The Headless Horseman was its first crude attempt at a physical form, a projection of fear. But what if it's learned? What if it's evolving, becoming more sophisticated, more human-like in its mimicry? Jensen's research hints at a chilling future where the Shadowman might no longer be a fleeting shadow, but a walking, talking entity, indistinguishable from ourselves, a perfect mimic. He disappeared in 2018, leaving behind a single, unmarked video recording. The recording, distorted and grainy, shows a figure standing in what appears to be his study, obscured by shadow. The figure, clearly human in form, turns slowly towards the camera. Its face is indistinct, but its eyes glow with a peculiar, cold luminescence. A voice, deep and resonant, not Jensen's, whispers, "We are all here now, and we remember everything." The video then cuts to black. The legend of Sleepy Hollow continues, but its underlying horror has only deepened. The Headless Horseman, a dramatic, visible threat, might have been the easier foe. The Shadowman, however, remains unseen, unheard, yet profoundly felt. It is a pervasive dread, a cold whisper in the mind, a flicker in the periphery. It feeds on the secrets, the fears, the unspoken anxieties of those who dwell in its ancient valley. And with each passing year, it grows stronger, more knowledgeable, more refined in its mimicry. The tranquil beauty of the Hudson Valley belies a timeless, patient malevolence. And somewhere in the lengthening shadows of Sleepy Hollow, an unseen watcher continues its centuries-long vigil, perfecting its craft, waiting for the opportune moment to shed its shadowy form and walk among us, indistinguishable, unforgettable, and utterly hungry for human experience. Its presence is a constant, chilling reminder that some fears are not just stories, but ancient, evolving truths waiting for their chance to step into the light. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. For the continuation of such content and to support us, please subscribe.